The Roman response to rebellion. Jewish-Roman wars and the hard edge of empire, 1st to 2nd century CE. The Roman Empire is often remembered for roads, law, and a kind of practical tolerance. Rome ruled a vast mosaic of peoples, each with local gods, local customs, local politics. Most of the time, Roman officials preferred order over ideology. Pay taxes, keep the peace, don't challenge the state. In return, Rome usually let communities keep their traditions. But there was a line Rome did not negotiate: open rebellion. When the empire believed its authority was being tested, when unrest threatened military control, tax revenue, or the prestige of Roman power, Rome could answer with overwhelming force. Not constantly, not everywhere, but decisively when it mattered. No story shows that hard edge more clearly than the Jewish-Roman conflicts of the 1st and 2nd centuries, especially the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE, and the crushing of the Bar Kokhba Revolt in 132 to 135 CE. To understand why these clashes became so intense, you have to understand the pressure points: religion, identity, and the politics of empire. Rome and Judea, a province on a fault line. In the 1st century CE, Judea was not just another corner of the empire. It was a region where religion and public life were fused, centered on the temple in Jerusalem and on a strong tradition of monotheism and law. For many Jews, worship was not a private preference. It was the structure of community life and identity. Rome, meanwhile, ruled through a different logic. It valued civic loyalty, public order, and the symbols of imperial authority. Across the empire, Rome expected respect for Roman law, for Roman officials, and for the political hierarchy that kept provinces quiet. That difference did not automatically make war inevitable. For long stretches, Rome governed through local elites, councils, priestly families, and, at times, client kings. Judea itself had experienced a complicated path. The Herodian dynasty ruled as Roman clients, and after Herod's kingdom was broken up, parts of the region came under Roman prefects and later procurators. The machinery of empire was present: taxation, soldiers, governors, but it was often mediated through local structures. And Rome did not typically demand that every subject abandon their gods. In fact, Jews enjoyed unusual legal accommodations in some periods: exemptions from certain civic religious obligations, the ability to maintain distinct practices, and recognition of the temple's importance. So why did it explode anyway? Because the relationship was strained by repeated tensions: economic pressure, resentment toward heavy-handed or corrupt officials, moments of cultural insult, and deep internal divisions within Jewish society itself. This matters. Judea was not politically unified. Different groups argued about the right way to live under foreign rule: priests connected to temple life, scholars and teachers, rural communities, urban elites, and revolutionary movements that rejected Roman authority outright. Even the decision to resist or accommodate was a battlefield. The sparks before the fire: symbols, insults, and fear. Before the Great Revolt, the region experienced dangerous flashpoints. One famous crisis occurred under Emperor Caligula, around 40 CE, when a plan to place his statue in the temple triggered outrage and a high-stakes standoff. The statue was ultimately not installed, but the episode revealed a truth. In Judea, symbols were not decorative, they were existential.
A statue could feel like conquest in stone. Other tensions were less dramatic but more constant. Taxes had to be paid. Roman power had to be respected. And when local conflicts between cities, factions, or social classes intersected with Roman authority, violence could spiral fast. The First Jewish-Roman War, 66 to 73/74 CE. From protest to revolt. By the mid-60s CE, the situation deteriorated sharply. Local grievances, economic pressure, disputes over taxation, resentment toward Roman-appointed officials, and confrontations between communities combined with revolutionary religious and political currents. In 66 CE, violence escalated into open revolt. In the early phase, rebels achieved shocking successes. A Roman force under the governor of Syria, Cestius Gallus, suffered a major defeat during an attempt to reassert control. To rebels, that victory looked like a sign. To Rome, it looked like a danger. A province had tasted the idea that Rome could be beaten. Rome could not allow that impression to stand. In the logic of empire, letting one province break away was not just losing territory. It was inviting other provinces to try the same thing. Rebellion was contagious. So Rome moved to crush it. The Roman response came in stages. General Vespasian was sent to restore control, beginning major operations in 67 CE. Rome retook towns and regions systematically, often with brutal efficiency, pushing toward Jerusalem. Then the empire itself shook. The year of the four emperors, 69 CE, plunged Rome into civil conflict. Vespasian was proclaimed emperor, and he left the final stage of the war to his son, Titus. Jerusalem, 70 CE, the siege and the fall. By 70 CE, Jerusalem became the center of gravity. The city was not only strategically important, it was sacred, home to the Second Temple, the heart of worship for many Jews. And it was politically symbolic. Whoever held Jerusalem could claim legitimacy. Titus's forces surrounded the city. What followed was a brutal siege. Food became scarce, disease spread, and inside Jerusalem, Jewish factions fought one another even as the Roman ring tightened. Civil conflict inside the walls magnified the disaster. Roman siege warfare was methodical. The army built earthworks. They positioned siege engines. They pushed toward the walls, breached them, were pushed back, and pushed again. Ancient accounts describe the Romans constructing a line of circumvallation, effectively sealing the city to control movement and choke supply. Whether every detail survives perfectly, the larger reality is unmistakable. The siege was relentless. Eventually, Roman forces broke through. In the chaos of fighting, the temple was destroyed. The exact chain of events is debated in detail: accident, intention, or escalation. But the outcome is not. The Second Temple, central to Jewish worship and identity, was gone. For Rome, the destruction carried a message. It announced that no sanctuary was beyond imperial reach. It also shattered the institutional center of Jewish sacrificial worship, changing Judaism forever. Jerusalem was devastated. Survivors were killed, enslaved, or displaced. Rome celebrated the victory in public ritual and propaganda, triumphs, coins, monuments, making conquest visible. The Arch of Titus in Rome, for example, famously depicts spoils associated with the temple. The empire made an example of the city. The war did not end instantly everywhere. Resistance continued, and the conflict's final chapters are often associated with strongholds like Masada, ending in 73/74 CE. But 70 CE was the turning point. The rebellion's heart had been cut out. After 70, punishment, control, and a new religious center. After the temple's destruction, Rome tightened control. A permanent Roman military presence expanded. The province was reorganized for security. One major policy shift was financial and symbolic. The fiscus Judaicus, a tax imposed on Jews, redirected a payment associated with the Jerusalem temple toward Roman purposes. It was punishment, and it was propaganda. Your sacred center is gone. Now your money funds Rome. And yet, even after such devastation, Roman rule did not become a non-stop campaign of repression in daily life. Roman governors still wanted taxes collected, roads secure, and local administration functioning. Rome could be pragmatic. For Jewish communities, the bigger change was internal and historic. With the temple destroyed, the center of religious life had to move. Traditions associate figures like Yohanan ben Zakkai with the establishment of new centers of learning after the war, especially in places like Yavne. Whatever the precise institutional details, the direction is clear. Judaism recentered around study, law, prayer, community leadership, and interpretation rather than temple sacrifice. A religion adapted to survive without its central building. But the memory of revolt lingered on both sides, and the underlying tensions did not disappear. The Kitos War, 115 to 117 CE. A diaspora warning. Between the First Revolt and the Bar Kokhba Revolt, another violent episode erupted. The Kitos War, during the reign of Trajan. It involved uprisings in parts of the Jewish diaspora, regions like Cyrenaica, Egypt, Cyprus, and areas of the Eastern Empire. Details vary by place and source, and ancient accounts can be partisan, but the broad significance is not hard to read. Rome feared that Jewish resistance could flare beyond Judea under the right conditions. The problem was not only local, it could be imperial. By the 2nd century, Judea was a province with trauma in its foundations, still contested in identity, still watched by Rome with suspicion. Hadrian and the road to 132. Why revolt returned. When Emperor Hadrian ruled, 117 to 138 CE, he sought consolidation. He traveled, he built, he reorganized. He wanted the empire stable and coherent. But in Judea, stability collided with sacred memory. Hadrian is associated with rebuilding Jerusalem as a Roman-style city, Aelia Capitolina. He is also associated, especially in later sources, with plans for a Roman temple there, often linked to Jupiter. To Roman administrators, these moves could look like normal imperial urban policy. To many Jews, they read as something else. A denial of sacred history, a replacement of identity, a declaration that Jerusalem would be Roman first and forever. There is also historical debate about whether Hadrian restricted circumcision. Some sources suggest prohibitions framed as bans on mutilation, while other scholars argue the scope and timeline are uncertain. But the emotional logic in the province was clear. People believed their way of life was under existential pressure. And when a community believes its core identity is being erased, especially after the memory of 70, it can turn from endurance to rebellion. The Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135 CE, a second, bigger collision. In 132 CE, revolt broke out again. Its central leader is remembered as Simon Bar Kokhba, known to supporters as Bar Kokhba, Son of the Star, a messianic title for some followers. The rebellion appears to have been organized, strategic, and initially successful. Rebels seized territory. They built a parallel administration. Coins were minted with revolutionary symbols and slogans, an act that was both practical and deeply political. Minting coins is what states do. It was a declaration. We are not merely protesting. We are claiming sovereignty. Archaeological evidence, including letters associated with the revolt, suggests disciplined organization and supply concerns: food, weapons, movement, authority. The rebels used the terrain, including caves and rugged regions, to hide, coordinate, and resist. For a time, the revolt was strong enough that Rome treated it not as a riot, but as a war. Some Jewish leaders, including Rabbi Akiva in later tradition, are associated with supporting Bar Kokhba's cause. Not all Jews supported the revolt, and internal disagreement existed. But the movement was powerful enough to alarm Rome at the highest level. Rome's response was massive. Hadrian did not treat this as a local disturbance. He treated it as a major crisis. Roman forces were reinforced, and the empire deployed experienced commanders, including Julius Severus. The strategy shifted toward grinding down the revolt through attrition, isolating strongholds, cutting supply lines, and retaking territory step by step. Ancient historian Cassius Dio describes the campaign as extremely destructive, emphasizing scorched landscapes, ruined settlements, and heavy losses. Modern historians debate numbers and details, but the overall picture is clear. This was one of Rome's most costly and brutal provincial wars of the period. The revolt's last phase is often linked to the fall of Betar in 135 CE, a key stronghold associated with Bar Kokhba's defeat. With that, organized resistance collapsed. And Rome followed victory with policy. After 135, the hard settlement. After crushing the revolt, Rome moved to prevent a repeat. Multiple measures are reported in ancient traditions and later sources. Limits on Jewish presence in Jerusalem, punishment of leaders, and reconfiguration of the province's identity. Jerusalem's Roman identity was reinforced as Aelia Capitolina. A common historical claim is that the province's name was changed to Syria Palestina, often understood as an attempt to weaken the association with Judea and Jewish national identity. Scholars discuss timing and intent, but the direction of policy is widely recognized. Rome wanted the region stabilized, Romanized, and politically defused. Some later traditions describe Jews being barred from Jerusalem or allowed entry only under restricted conditions. The precise enforcement likely varied over time, but the overall outcome is not in doubt. Jerusalem was no longer the religious political center it had been, and Jewish national hopes was struck down again. For Jewish life, the consequences were profound. The temple had already been destroyed in 70. Now, after 135, hopes of near-term political restoration were shattered a second time. Jewish religious life continued, powerfully, but it shifted. With sacrifice centered on the temple no longer possible, religious leadership and practice moved further toward rabbinic interpretation, local communities, study, law, prayer, and tradition. Centers of Jewish learning and life strengthened in places like Galilee and across diaspora communities. A people recentered itself after the loss of its central shrine and after repeated imperial blows. These wars also helped widen the separation between emerging Christianity and Judaism. In the first century, the movements were still closely intertwined in many places. Over time, especially under the pressures of Roman policy, identity disputes, and divergent religious development, the distance grew. Why Rome hit so hard? The logic of empire. It is tempting to imagine the Roman response as pure hatred or pure fanaticism. Sometimes, individual officials may have acted brutally out of ambition or contempt. But the larger engine was imperial logic. Rome believed order was the foundation of legitimacy. If a province rebelled successfully, it threatened military credibility, tax revenue, and the reputation that kept other provinces obedient. In an empire, reputation is security. From Rome's perspective, a hard response was not optional. It was a warning to everyone else. And from the perspective of many Jews, especially those who revolted, the stakes were equally existential. This was not merely a disagreement over a tax rate. This was about who controlled sacred space, cultural identity, and political survival. Not constant repression, but a hard edge when threatened. One of the most important truths in this story is the one people often miss. Rome was not always in crush mode. Most of the time, Rome wanted provinces to function quietly, profitably, predictably. Rome often tolerated local religions, even unusual ones, as long as they did not become political threats. The empire was pragmatic. But when Rome believed its authority was challenged, when a movement looked like separatism, sovereignty, or mass revolt, Rome responded with force that could reshape a society for generations. That is what happened in 70, and that is what happened again in 135. A note on religious persecution in a Roman context. When people hear religious persecution, they often picture an empire hunting beliefs simply for being different. Rome usually worked differently. Roman religion was intertwined with public loyalty, civic rituals, festivals, sacrifices, and respect for imperial authority. Most provinces could add Roman gods to local ones and keep going. Judaism was different in a specific way. It was strongly monotheistic and built around law and covenant, not a flexible pantheon. Yet Rome often accommodated it, because Rome preferred stability. For long periods, Jews could practice, gather, and maintain community life. Even the temple in Jerusalem functioned under Roman rule for decades. So what changed? Politics. In the ancient world, a large public religion was never only religion, it was also identity, law, leadership, money, and public space. When rebellion rose, Roman officials began to see religious institutions as political infrastructure, something that could organize resistance. During the outbreak of 66 CE, one dramatic symbolic act is often highlighted in the sources: the cessation of sacrifices offered on behalf of the emperor in the Jerusalem temple. In Roman eyes, that could look like a declaration that imperial authority was no longer recognized. Symbols became signals, signals became threats, and threats triggered force. After 70 CE, with the temple destroyed,
Rome did not need to ban the temple. It had erased the building itself. And after 135 CE, policies that reshaped Jerusalem and restricted Jewish presence were not only urban planning.
They were meant to prevent a sacred national center from becoming a rallying point again. Later Jewish tradition also remembers Hadrian's era as a time of harsh decrees and persecutions. Stories of teachers punished, of study restricted, of martyrdom used as warning. Historians debate how widespread and consistent these measures were across time and location. But the memory itself tells you something. The period was experienced as an existential squeeze. The Flavian message. Victory as a public warning. Rome did not simply win wars. Rome performed victory. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Flavian dynasty used conquest as political capital. Public triumphs displayed spoils and captives. Monuments celebrated imperial strength. Coins carried messages of subjugation. And in Rome itself, the visual language of empire said again and again, "This is what happens when you challenge the state." That propaganda mattered because it reached far beyond Judea. A farmer in Gaul or a merchant in Asia Minor did not need to know the details of Jewish law to understand the warning. Rebellion ends in ruin. That is why Rome's response felt so absolute. It was not only about defeating an enemy, it was about preserving a reputation that kept the empire together. The Long Shadow. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE is one of the most consequential events in ancient religious history. It transformed Judaism's institutional center. It shaped memory, mourning, and identity. And it became a symbol both of loss and of endurance. The Bar Kokhba Revolt's defeat in 135 CE deepened that transformation. It narrowed the possibilities of political restoration under Roman rule. It shifted Jewish life further into new structures. It reshaped the identity of the region in Roman administration. And it left a long shadow over relationships among Jews, Romans, and emerging Christian communities. History does not end with the crushing of a revolt. It continues in what people build afterward. In this story, the most striking thing is not only the empire's capacity for force, it is also the capacity of a people to adapt, to mourn, to remember, to reorganize, and to survive. That is the paradox of this period. The hard edge of Rome and the enduring resilience of those who lived through it.